Great. Well, welcome everyone. Good to be with you all. And it's great to be joined by an exceptional group of leaders and advocates from the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. The dedication and creativity that the coalition and crisis centers have shown throughout this COVID-19 pandemic has been life-saving for so many survivors right here in New Hampshire. They've done so much to meet the increased demand for services, but they need even more resources to provide the individual support that each survivor deserves. Thankfully, this past year, Congress has stepped up and been able to pass legislation to support the essential work of our crisis centers. And I'm proud to have played an influential role in getting the American Rescue Plan Act and the Voca-Fix Act over the finish line and signed into law by President Biden. The American Rescue Act includes $450 million for programs combating gender-based violence, and the Voca-Fix Act corrected a fiscal error to ensure that $4 to $7 billion of non-taxpayer money will now be available for the Crime Victims Fund. Most recently, I supported the passage of the Bipartisan Family Violence Prevention and Service Improvement Act in the House. And FISPA is a critical pillar in the federal government's ability to address domestic violence. This legislation increases the funding to $253 million for evidence-informed, community-based prevention initiatives and creates a new underserved populations grant program. And lastly, I want to mention how proud I was to help shepherd legislation reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act through the House last year. And I'm pleased that the Senate has finally reached a bipartisan compromise on VAWA that will be rolled out shortly. VAWA was last reauthorized way back in 2013. I'm determined to do all I can to ensure that 2022 is the year that we get it done once again. I'm proud to have advocated for these essential resources, but more is certainly needed. I'll continue working in Congress to ensure that survivors have the support they need to recover and that we have prevention programs as well. We must address the long-term trauma associated with gender-based violence, and part of that starts with having access to these life-changing services provided by the coalition and their 13-member organizations. I so appreciate you all being here and sharing your expertise with us on this important issue. And with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to Joyce Smith, the Program Director of the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, for introductions of our participants today and to kick things off. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Kuster. As always, we are so grateful to you and your continued support and stellar advocacy on behalf of victims and survivors of domestic and sexual violence in New Hampshire. Without critical funding like FIPSA and VAWA, our member programs would not be able to provide the critical 24-hour support services and comprehensive prevention, education, and outreach programming to their local communities. Joined with me today is our Housing and Economic Justice Manager, Rachel Duffy, our Public Policy Specialist, Pamela Kailik, and our AmeriCorps Victims Assistance Program Manager, Emily Provencher, as well as one of our AmeriCorps members, Shivani Patel.
Fantastic. We can turn it over to Rachel if you want to talk a little bit about housing.
Yes, thank you so much, Congresswoman Kuster, for offering this space to be able to talk about these really important issues. And we really are grateful for your ongoing advocacy and support of funding streams such as FIPSA and VAWA and the incoming ARP funds as well. So just a little bit of a background about some of the programs that the coalition offers to survivors throughout our crisis centers. So the coalition is the recipient of a HUD-funded rapid rehousing program, and 8 of our crisis centers are recipients of that funding. And the support that service provides is up to 2 years of rental support, case management, and first month's rent, security deposit support, which has been really crucial. We also have a Voca-funded Housing First program, which offers flexible funding for survivors to not only become prepared to get out into the apartment world and searching for permanent housing options. And it supports similar things such as first month's rent and security deposit, but a wide variety of other items such as utility assistance, offers support with clothing for job interviews. It is a very flexible funding source, and it has been just another creative source for us. And we also are the recipient of what's called the Allstate Match Savings Program and Allstate Financial Empowerment Curriculum, which offers survivors the opportunity to learn about things such as budgeting, savings, credit repair, and building. And we have really found that some of the existing issues that remain for survivors with housing, especially during this pandemic, is a lack of affordable housing. Right now, we see that there's a 1% vacancy rate, and in a point in time count, we found that at the start of the pandemic and from 2019 to 2020, there was a 21% increase in homelessness across the state. And we know that survivors, one of the main barriers for survivors in leaving abuse is finding access to housing. So we've been using these creative funding streams to be able to house survivors. And not only that, but using, again, the Allstate Match Savings Program, which the coalition essentially provides financial literacy to survivors. And we know that 99% of survivors who experience financial abuse, and that has been an even more difficult thing for survivors to face right now during the pandemic. Abusers use that tactic, exploiting and abusing survivors by taking tax credits or not allowing them to have access to jobs. So we offer the Allstate literacy, and they are able to become banked with the support of advocates, and they are also able to reach 2 tiers of savings goals, whether that be a $500 savings tier or a $1,000 savings tier, and the coalition is able to match that amount, which can then double their savings.
Wow. Great.
So we have found that using a combination of different programming has really been key, again, in creating and building more safety and limiting a survivor's need to return back to an abusive situation. So again, all of this funding that is coming through is really paramount in creating safer and more just communities. So thank you so much for all of your continued support.
Well, thank you for everything you're doing on the front lines. I think we were just had a Zoom with Catch Community Housing here in Concord, and we do a lot of work in our office on affordable housing and low-income housing. But as I visit these units, I'm so excited for the opportunities, particularly for single moms with a couple of kids. It's really hard to find a place, to find a safe, clean, affordable place to live. And it's particularly hard dealing with kind of getting over the hurdle of the first month, sometimes it's first and last month, plus a security deposit. You have to have thousands of dollars to even get into a place, and then to have a steady enough income to continue to pay. So I think, your agencies, that first step of getting to a safe place, being able to leave an abusive relationship and knowing that you'll be safe and your kids will be safe, and then trying to get, over the hurdle. But it's so important nowadays. People really talk about this housing first approach to social services, because it's almost impossible to even apply for them. If you're living out of your car, what's your address, and you need to copy forms or send them on the internet or have a phone number that's reliable, or and to say nothing of what it does to children. And that's, what I worry about is the next generation. We owe them a better start so that they can thrive. So many of the issues that we run into, and including domestic violence, can be generational. It can go from one generation to the next, and how to break that cycle. It's so important to have kids start out in a safe, healthy place. They'll do better in school. Their health and well-being will be better. Their mental health will certainly be better. And the moms and the dads are going to be less exhausted dealing with them. And that's a big part of what we're working with as we come out of COVID, as we turn the corner, put Omicron behind us, head into the spring and summer, and get back to our normal lives, is that we have a tremendous backlog of mental health, and including sexual and domestic violence, addiction, the cycles that people go through, the hard times that they go through were really exacerbated during COVID. And what I'm hoping as we come out of this, wages are getting higher, when there's a short supply of labor. The jobs that are available will have better wages. So as these moms and women get back on their feet, get back into school and job training and back into the workforce, hopefully they won't have to juggle 2 or 3 part-time jobs at $7.50 or $8 an hour. They can find a job that's steady, that has good wages, that has benefits. And so that's also a big part of the work that we do in our office, focusing on that workforce training, starting right out of high school. We have high schools in New Hampshire where you can get an LNA, early nurse training right out of high school, and then get established in a job, and then go back to a community college and work your way up to a registered nurse or nurse practitioner. And those are kind of the pathways that we're trying to make available to people, so that if they struggled earlier in life with a violent relationship or having kids very young, that they can get to a place, get on their feet, and get the training so that their future looks brighter, where they have steady wages and steady housing. They can afford a car that doesn't break down in the middle of winter. I worry particularly in the winter in these cold temperatures. It's so hard to keep a car going and to pay not just the gas, but the snow tires. And, it's hard in New Hampshire. If you're low income, it's hard to be reliable getting to work. I've talked to employers and they get so upset. They say, well, they don't show up on time, or they call in sick. And I say to them, this is up north. I say, do they have snow tires? Do you know if they have snow tires? Maybe instead of a Christmas bonus or a ham or a turkey, you should be giving snow tires so that people can get to work. People want to be reliable, but sometimes life just intervenes and it's too hard, So, all right, well, who's next? This is very helpful.
Pamela, we would love for you to talk a little bit about the public policy aspect that's going on at the coalition.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, Congresswoman, if it's okay, I would love to just tap in briefly, Joy, because just
Sure.
What you said about mental health and the ability to support young children, I think is really pivotal. So before I launch into my points, I would love to just bring her in on this.
Sure. Hi, Joy.
Hi again. I super appreciate you letting me jump in. And I really appreciated, Congresswoman, you talking about that housing first model and the importance of providing those basic necessities to start with. And when we're seeing things like a lack of mental health services, lack of available housing, those basic necessities help people move forward from these abusive situations, it really impedes their ability to start fresh. So, when we continue to see these challenges, it really contributes to people's healing process. And we're certainly seeing right now, due to the pandemic, the continued landscape that changes. We're seeing, system delays. So people trying to just get some additional supports and resources. So we're seeing system delays at courts and state agencies, decreased hours of operation with our community partners due to staff shortages right now. And again, that can kind of contribute to stalling the momentum for forward movement. We're also seeing financial setbacks due to ongoing COVID exposure through the workplace or through school or through childcare programs. And
what a catch-22 if you didn't even have the paid sick time. And then your child gets exposed, and then you have to stay home because your child's been exposed, but you don't have a salaried wage, you have an hourly wage, and you're not going to get paid if you don't show up. It's just a total negative spiral.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing that frequently with folks that we're working with. And obviously also the lack of available housing is contributing to more complex safety planning with victims who are still living in isolation with their perpetrators because there's no housing for them to shift to, and they may not feel comfortable coming into a shelter or a hotel stay. And we're also seeing longer shelter and hotel stays due to the fact that there's no available housing for folks to shift to. So a lot of our crisis centers are renting apartments and Airbnbs in order to provide longer stays with more appropriate amenities for families, because it's really difficult if you have small children and you're staying in a hotel and it doesn't have a kitchenette, there's no way to cook your meals. It's really important to be able to have all of those amenities available. So our programs are getting really creative with some of these funding streams in order to provide those appropriate places for families. And also a few of our crisis centers have purchased additional shelter space or adapted their existing space to kind of mitigate the COVID exposure. So again, this funding is very critical in being able to provide that.
Well, I remember early on, it was a real concern about COVID exposure, and people, any kind of congregate housing, including domestic violence shelters, people were at risk of exposure. And I think, now we're better equipped to understand it and understand if people get their vaccines and get their boosters and wear their masks and keep their distance. It's not about washing your groceries anymore or, wiping down counters. I mean, obviously washing your hands and wiping down counters can help with cleanliness. But one thing I wanted to ask, and then Pam, I definitely want to hear from you on the public policy front, but Joy or Rachel or any of you, what were you able to see an impact from the enhanced child tax credit that was in place? It's now sadly just ended, but we're still having the conversation. I, for one, support continuing that because I think it's a very directed way to get help to these families. And I've certainly been reading stories about, moms saying, yes, I was able to make a car payment or pay for repairs and tires or, keep a car going so that then I could be reliable in the workforce. Any stories come to mind for you about the child tax credit that might be helpful for me to share with my colleagues?
Absolutely. I think Rachel can really speak well to that.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah. So yes, it has been extremely helpful for the families that we work with, especially within the housing programs. Sometimes it's a matter of a utility bill. There's, some financial needs that aren't able to be met by all of the different resources that are available in the community. So being able to have that extra income was paramount in being able to whether that be pay off a debt that had been lingering, because we know so many survivors had just increased their debt so much. But the other piece of it is that, it's also been really helpful to work in conjunction with our Allstate match savings program. Having a little bit of extra wiggle room allowed for survivors to be able to meet their match and again, double their savings. So specifically, I think it's just, again, created a little bit more flexibility. And I think that empowerment to be able to have, them be able to, again, see a bill fall off and be able to move forward and refocus, or have an additional, be able to, support childcare costs. So yes, it was definitely extremely helpful. And I was happy to see too that there was protections that were involved within the EITC around domestic violence survivors.
Yes.
And being able
and
to
that survivors could apply for it without having the perpetrator involved, which I think is really important.
Yes.
One thing, if you could help us get the word out, it has ended for now, but it's important for people to realize that for 2021, the total benefit was $3,600 per child. And that if they did not receive that total amount, maybe they were, took a few months for them to hear about the program and they hadn't yet applied for it, that they should file right now with the IRS and get the balance due to them in a lump sum payment, which also, if it came to them to the tune of $1,000, let's say, that might help them with the down payment to get into an apartment or something like that. So they're entitled to up to $3,600 per child for 2021. And we're trying to, get the word out about that. Great. Pam, you want to tell us about the public policy? I know you all do an amazing job with that.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Congresswoman. And I just really wanted to take a moment to reiterate, our gratitude for the work that you do and all of your colleagues in Congress who really have prioritized FIPSA reauthorization and also helping make sure other pivotal federal programs such as VAWA and Voca, the Voca Fix Act got passed and are moving forward. We really hope that VAWA can get pushed over the finish line and FIPSA can get pushed over the finish line in the coming months. These programs are so critical in terms of helping maintain and strengthening these essential services that our member programs and advocates provide around the state. And I think we are going to be seeing, we've started to see and will continue to see some of the huge impact that the American Rescue Plan Act dollars will have on our programs as they roll into the state and we start working with our member programs to identify tailored ways in which they can support the needs of their survivors in their communities. So we can really not say enough how much your advocacy means to us and the work that we do here on the ground. I think I just wanted to take a moment to just kind of echo some of the things that my colleagues have shared and not trying to be too pessimistic, but really try to be realistic in the fact that, while we've learned a lot in the last 2 years when it comes to responding to the complex needs of survivors of domestic and sexual violence in our state, the pandemic continues to really greatly impact, and create barriers for survivors and the work of our member programs. And so while much has changed since March 2020, there are still significant issues that really prevent survivors from accessing important service, especially just things that continue to be outside of our control, like ever-changing hospital visitor policies or court procedures that impact advocate accompaniment and just the ability for our advocates to be, side by side with victims at those pivotal moments where they need the most support. And so, we're happy to continue to be adaptable and amenable in the best way we can. But, the landscape of service continues to be shaped dramatically by the pandemic and, is something that we're going to have to really keep in mind moving forward, not to be unappreciative of the incredible work that you've done, but just, a gentle plug that we're going to still need support, moving forward. And I think I wanted to just,
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to reiterate or share a couple of statistics on top of what has already been shared, just to kind of give you a glimpse of what we've seen in the late stages of 2020 into 21 in the last reporting period. We saw more than 80,000 hotline calls come into our crisis centers, which it was a little bit of a drop from the peak that we saw in 2020, but still much higher
That's a
than
lot.
years prior to the pandemic. So the demand is there. And then I think kind of adding on to just the housing challenges, we saw a 16% increase in the number of bed nights that survivors and their children spent in shelter, which is a more than 6,000 increase since the previous year. And I think the most alarming statistic that I might share with you today is the fact that in previous years, the average length of stay in shelter was kind of around a 70, 75. And this past year, it went up 105 days,
Wow.
which is just an incredible amount of time
That's a
for
long
someone.
time.
Yeah.
And to be up in the air like that, and just the anxiety for somebody to not, I think that's one of the hardest things that we've all been dealing with, but particularly people that are in a precarious situation, is just the level of uncertainty in our lives is astonishing. We're so used to being able to plan ahead and count on things, and we can't count on anything now, and it's so hard to cope with that. And I was looking at the statistics about the calls to the national hotline, because we've stayed, I think I should have said this at the beginning, but I think you all know I'm the founder and co-chair of the Bipartisan Task Force to End Sexual Violence. And so we've, during COVID, had the national domestic violence and child abuse hotline people come on. And it's just astonishing, that increase and the shift to younger people. That was really heartbreaking during the shutdown, that for the first time ever, the majority of cases were young people, children, teens, and 80%, 79% were calls of survivors, victims, really, at the time. They're not yet survivors. They haven't gotten to a safe place, who are living in the same home with the perpetrator. And then it also an incredibly high percent, I think 67% stated that the abuser was a family member. So 2/3 are dealing with abuse at the hands of a family member, presumably somebody that they had trusted and relied on. That's the part that's so shocking. And just, I think in terms of the trauma, there's got to be multiple layers of trauma. First of all, dealing with sexual assault and domestic violence, but then dealing with the harm coming from a family member, a parent, a trusted person in your life that is just no longer reliable to keep you safe in your own home, and how hard that is to leave that situation. So that's just something, the layers of complexity that we're dealing with here. And I'm sure you have cases, family members, where the spouse has been abused and comes in to you for domestic violence, but then later you realize that the children are victims of sexual assault or physical violence. It's all just kind of tied up together. Once somebody steps outside the bounds of what society considers acceptable behavior, and once that line is blurred and you're, being physically violent with a family member, then other other taboos probably, go by the wayside. So,
Yeah.
and I think you're right that, to be honest, we're probably going to be dealing with this for a long time. There's probably going to be a group of people, whether it's young children, whether it's survivors, that are going to look back at 2020, 2021 as two of the toughest years of their lifetime. And it's heartbreaking for children. They don't know anything else. They started this when they're 2 years old. Now they're 4 years old and they haven't ever gone out the door without a mask on. It's going to be really hard. And then all the complications in schools and daycares. So
Yeah, just if I could close, I think
Yeah.
what you said, I think is just, it weighs heavily, I think, on all of us. I think especially knowing that those traditional support systems that were previously available prior to the pandemic, having trusted adults in schools or extracurricular activities that could also be, systems looking out for young children and youth, have really kind of been displaced or dismantled. And I think we really need to do some significant community building to reestablish those support systems. And I know Emily will touch on a little bit the upcoming Respect Week for Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. But I think, we can, prevention education is just something that will continue to be so pivotal in, helping build, those social emotional skills, helping young individuals identify who their supports are in their communities, who they can reach out to, and, let people know when things aren't going okay. So I think prevention education will be a huge part of this next step forward. But I won't monopolize any more of the conversation.
No, you've done great. And I totally agree with you. We rely on coaches and teachers and after school programs and to help us identify when things are not right and to give kids a safe place to speak up. We do a lot of visits to after school programs, and I'm thinking of a Boys and Girls Club down in Milford that does an awesome job, and Concord and Nashua, and all these places where they're often the ones that can see a child that's troubled or something's going on, or even see a parent that's coming in distraught and is more secretive or more worried or has signs of abuse. And I like your idea, Pam, that we need community education too. I mean, that's part of doing this and sharing it with the press and getting the word out so that people understand. I've been thinking a lot lately about how disparate the experience has been under COVID. In some ways, it's one of those remarkable experiences where everybody's going through the same thing. And the shutdown at the beginning, and then the fear of COVID and wearing the mask and getting the vaccines and going to the grocery store. And every time you see somebody, oh, are they okay? Are they okay? But in other ways, there's a huge variety of levels of trauma and complication to this. And, early on, it's really remarkable the number of people who could continue to work from home. We talk about the unemployment went up to 16%, but that's 84% of the people that kept working even when everything was shut down. And some of them were frontline workers, but many of them got on Zoom. We'd never even heard of it. And suddenly we're living our life on it, getting together. But most people don't really think twice. For many people, oh, they got to be home. They can take their dog for a walk. They can make a bowl of soup for lunch. They can put in a load of laundry. They'll be home when their kids get off the bus. There are some things that were much easier, but we're not really thinking about, oh my God, you're home. You're locked in with your perpetrator. The person who's abusing you every night is now the person that you're stuck in the house with all day. And you don't have another trusted adult or safe place that you can go and talk to somebody. So I do think that we are going to need some community education about it as well. All right, Emily, you get the last word here. And by the way, we've been joined by my colleague Sam Cooper-Wall, who's with us, and you've met Elizabeth. Sylvia Chanley, who Elizabeth is now new to our office. We had several hires during COVID, so it's funny because we haven't even all been together in the same office in quite a while, but Elizabeth's from New Hampshire and is going to be more and more involved in these issues, so I'm delighted she's with us. All right, Emily.
Of course. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for taking the time to chat with us today and for your interest in hearing about the work we're doing in the AmeriCorps Victim Assistance Program. We currently have 9 AVAP members placed in the state of New Hampshire in crisis centers, as well as some criminal justice programs. We actually have one of our AVAP members, Shivani Patel, with us today. So hopefully she'll have a few minutes
Hi, Siobhan.
after I wrap up to chat with you about her experience in the program so far. Our program has a focus on economic empowerment. So we're placing our members to kind of help continue to meet that need we're seeing for additional support in recovering from financial abuse. Our AVAP members are helping administer quite a few of the programs that Rachel spoke about, as well as offering workshops on financial literacy and financial safety planning to survivors. We're giving them extensive training at the beginning of and as they're continuing in their program year to become knowledgeable on these resources. And having a cohort of members who are coming together every single month helps them to kind of resource share with one another and collaborate and build ideas on new things that they can do to help support survivors. We've certainly, with COVID, seen some challenges in being able to offer some of those workshops that we were offering in the past, but we've also really gotten creative. One thing that's been really cool that we've had kind of starting up at one of our member programs is one of our AVAP members was looking to kind of run like a soap making workshop with the shelter guests, kind of just as something fun to do. She makes soap as a hobby. And so we kind of thought that it would be cool to also incorporate some education on running a small business or participating in kind of a secondary income generating activity. So that the workshop could kind of focus on self-care, but also be, educational for the shelter guests, especially where we're seeing shelter guests with longer stays. This is kind of a different way to engage them and to think about, resources that are available to them to help build their financial stability after they're out of the shelter program. We're also, it seems like, our current program year just started in September, but we're already looking to recruit for our next program year. So I know we've had our living allowance increase come in through American Rescue Plan funds. That's been really helpful in making this program more financially accessible for members who are considering joining. As Joy and Rachel have shared, kind of some of those challenges we've seen in housing has definitely impacted AmeriCorps programs statewide. We still have survivors struggling to find housing. We also have prospective AmeriCorps members who are having a tough time finding housing. We're looking to kind of get as creative as we can as program staff statewide and supporting them in their search for housing, supporting them in potentially finding other AmeriCorps members to room with and live with. So that's kind of our newest, where we're getting creative in the AmeriCorps program. As we spoke about a bit earlier, I've been doing some work on Granite State Respect Week as one of our really great strategies to kind of bring in prevention education statewide. We did have to take a year off from this program last year just due to COVID and online learning. But this year we're offering Granite State Respect Week, the week of February 14th as part of Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. We're offering this kind of as a Spirit Week style event with a different kind of focus on the learning and activities that students are doing each day. So far, I just checked this before we hopped on the call, we have 20 schools registered and our registration is still open for that. So we're excited to see their engagement in this program.
I visited the high schools during this program and it's really good. It's really, It's very, very creative, very thoughtful, very informative. And
Mhm.
I think a big part of what it entails is just breaking the ice on the conversation. It's a hard conversation to have.
Mhm.
I mean, anything related to teen dating is hard, but the concept of teen dating violence or coercion, just understanding what it looks like, what does it mean? And whether it's for yourself or for a friend, you can feel it when a friend's
Mhm.
boyfriend or girlfriend is being coercive and,
Yeah.
Whatever they may be withholding or demanding or things that are
Mhm.
just not reasonable. And Spirit Week really, what I saw, and it's funny, I happened to mention Milford before, but it was Milford High
Mhm.
School was one of those high schools that's way into it.
Yeah.
And they were just doing a great job. And
Mhm.
they combined it with the spirit type, clothing
Yeah.
and costumes and all of that. But it also, people came together in
Mhm.
the gymnasium and they were learning and they were thinking and being creative about how to relate to these issues and what to do about it. I know from raising
Mhm.
my own sons, I remember this conversation with one of my sons about a friend in college, and he just literally didn't know what to
Mhm.
do to be helpful when somebody came to him with this problem, and he was racked with guilt about not being sufficiently
Mhm.
helpful. And I think we need to educate the
Yeah.
whole community at every age. Here's what you do. Here's who to call. Here's who to
Mhm.
turn to. Here's somebody in the high school that's a safe, confident place to go. So that's great. I'm glad it came back.
Yeah, we're so excited.
And if Shivani wants to wrap us up with just a brief overview of your experience as an AVAT member at Bridges in Nashua.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Go ahead, Siobhan. Nice to see you.
Nice to meet you. I was with a client earlier, which is why I joined late, but I'm excited to be here and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak with all of you. And I'm also grateful for you for taking the time out of your day to attend this meeting. So I am an AVAT. This is my first service year and I'm currently stationed at Bridges, which is a domestic violence and sexual assault crisis center. I've been here for 4 months now, and even though that's such a short amount of time, I feel like I've learned a lot and gained a lot of transferable skills. This sort of field isn't one that you can just jump into after going to like college or any sort of university for. It's something that you have to kind of get your foot into the door and be able to share experiences with the people in your community and be able to be exposed to that sort of environment. And I think it's really important that the program itself, like the AVAT program, empowers survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. One of my biggest passions is probably producing policy specifically for these types of vulnerable populations. So specifically um, minorities, whether it be LGBTQ communities, women, and then what was the other one? Um, ethnic minorities as well. Those are really important. And I feel like Nashua, which is the community that we serve that's in our catchment area, it's very reflective of that population. One of the biggest lessons I think I've learned in the matter of 4 months is that it's not really about you as an advocate. It's about the survivor and being able to support them, even if you may not agree with a lot of the decisions that they make. It's your job to make sure that if they want to go back into the situation, that you have a complex safety plan and empower them and let them know that even if you're doing that, we're still going to be here to help you. And it's incredibly important, especially in the pandemic. I'm extremely grateful that this crisis center is still able to function and operate. I know that a lot of other people don't have the resources because of the pandemic, because they're forced to stay in these abusive situations with no other resources. And then even focusing on economic empowerment, which is like the common theme this year for AVAPs, I realized that it's really important to provide that to our clients, because a lot of clients don't know a lot of the resources that New Hampshire has to offer, whether it's like the SNAP benefits, whether it's match savings programs. A lot of our clients are stuck in these abusive situations because they're being financially abused in situations where their bank accounts are being controlled. They have no money for themselves. They've never been taught to budget. They don't know what a credit score is. I've been personally working on a presentation that gives survivors a lot of these resources and how to access your credit score. What does it mean? What can you do to improve it? And then also a list of different resources that they can utilize in order to get themselves out of their toxic situations. So even though I've, again, only been in this for 4 months, I'm eager to learn, and I'm eager to continue my service year and hopefully do it again next year. But I wanted to keep it relatively short because I know you are pressed for time. So I thank you again for coming and letting me speak about my experiences. It's been so incredibly humbling to be able to work with a client throughout their time here and having them come in their lowest point and being able to see them not fully healed, but making steps towards that, seeing them come out stronger than they were before, and being able to help them rediscover the voice that they already knew that they had. So I'm incredibly humbled to be here and being able to have all these experiences.
Shivani, we're so lucky to have you. Thank you. Thank you for choosing New Hampshire. Where are you from? Around here, or where did you come from?
Yeah, so I've been in New Hampshire my entire life. I've been
Good.
for 15 years, and then I moved to Hudson, and that's where I am now.
Yeah, but did you even know anything about these programs before when you were growing up? Yeah.
Oh,
So it's so great to just get the word out to people so they understand that help is available. I mean, New Hampshire, it's an interesting place. We're not super strong on the state funded resources for people, but at the community level, and certainly the federal funding coming in, and what we are very strong is the nonprofit level, the Coalition for Domestic and Sexual Violence, the domestic violence shelters in each community, that, the frontline workers that are doing the social work and the therapy and the counseling and helping. And the piece that you're doing is really critical, because they're not going to be able to leave, as you call it, a toxic situation if they can't land on their feet financially. That's really the bridge. And sometimes that's a chasm that they can't get across, but we can all do everything we can to help them get to the other side, to a place where they're safe and they're healthy and their families will be. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And thank you to all of you. This is always so informative. I really, really appreciate being with you. Thank you, Elizabeth, for setting it up, and Sam for working on the legislation and the funding. And, our top priority for the task force is these funding streams, and making sure that, the VAWA reauthorization gets, I didn't realize that it had been 9 years. It's terrible. I mean, we've got to do a better job with that, and all the other programming. And you've given us some really helpful information and talking points with our colleagues about the flexible funding during COVID, and to continue that, because these situations, each one is so unique as to what their needs are. And that's the one problem sometimes with federal funding, is that it's very, proscribed down a certain path, and thinking that every situation looks the same. And I think we did a good job during COVID that the emergency funding that we put in place was much more flexible. So what I keep saying to my team, let's take the positives and the lesson learned from COVID and apply that going forward, so that, we can be stronger than ever in these programs. Well, thank you very much. I've got to wrap up. I'm head on the rest of my day here on a Friday afternoon, but stay safe. Big storm coming tomorrow. So I hope you and your clients are all in a safe place tonight. And be well. and we'll be together in person soon. I keep saying that, but I definitely think by the spring and summer, the COVID numbers will recede, the nice weather will come on strong, and we can all be together again. And I can applaud your work in a more public setting. So thank you so much. Good to be with you all. Take care.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank
Take
you
care.
so much.
Stay safe.